Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, it's RPG a Day, Day 3, and our question for today is what gives a game staying power? I'll tell you what, I'm still making my blog, and I forgot like how much work writing is. I really do like writing, but it took me a lot more time than I really wanted it to. And I'm going to be playing some BXD&D tonight. I'm really pumped we're going to be playing that in Greyhawk. But this video has nothing to do with that. So, what gives an RPG its staying power? There's one other thing I need to talk about before I actually talk about the answer, because I knew the answer right away, but I wasn't sure. I kind of second guessed myself, and there is a danger to the Earth being round, and that is that RPG a Day happens sooner in places like Korea and the UK than it does in the East Coast of the United States. Now that's great because I get to watch and listen to other people's answers to RPG a Day, so there's like this constant stream of information if I want to do like not sleep or anything like that. But I have to write my notes ahead of time because I don't want to be affected by other people's answers. I like the way that RPG a Day makes me think, and I love hearing all the various different answers and really kind of like questioning my own thinking or like hearing, what I think from a different angle and all that kind of stuff. And I still haven't answered this question yet, have I? But what can happen sometimes is, you hear somebody else's answer and say, I don't want it to affect mine. So I make my notes. I already know pretty much what I'm going to say and what I'm going to write. Sure enough, it looked like somebody might have been reading my notes. So what happened was I came up with some ideas. I second guessed myself because I knew what the answer was. But I kind of forgot my admonition to other people that were kind of reluctant to participate that these questions are prompts. They're not necessarily, you don't have to answer them verbatim. They're just jumping off points. And I was taking it a little bit too literally, and I was thinking about, like, what about the games and the systems themselves? What gives them staying power? And I finally came back to my original answer. But I don't want to waste what I wrote down and thought about. So I'm going to go through this really fast. When a game stays in the sweet spot for as long as possible, I've talked about this in the past, other people have talked about this in the past, we have to kind of like look for the horse and beat it some more. The idea that, oftentimes games like you graduate out of the sweet spot. There's this spot of competence that's fun to play in. And, games have various methods of progression, and some of them suffer from the dreaded power creep, where all of a sudden you kind of just, your characters age out, and they're no longer fun because they're too superheroish. They're caricatures of what, the characters used to be. And so games that kind of keep you compressed in that area of like just, competent enough, maybe more competent than normal. It's one of the things I like about Ubiquity, is the idea that I could look at my Musketeer Philippe Moreau and I could look at the stats given for D'Artagnan and realize that's a huge expenditure of experience points and represents like considerable long-term play, but the characters can still kind of live in the same house. I mean, D'Artagnan is better. You definitely improve, but it's not this thing where you kind of like, you age out. So I like a game that can do that. That gives it staying power. You can play that game for a long time. When the system makes sense to you and it works for you, and that's different for every single person. But like when you like the system an awful lot, that can give a game a lot of staying power. And contradictory to that answer, kind of, but not really, is the idea that the system has the ability for you to tinker with it to make it new again, to make it interesting again. And maybe it's your tinker with the setting or some other aspect of it. It's flexible enough in that way. And maybe sometimes it's a game where you can kind of play with the nuts and bolts and tweak how it works. And, for the most part, I like to play games, hands-off, rules as written these days, because there's a lot of games for me to explore. And I don't want to sit there and put my own stamp on what I think they should be like, because they were designed the way they were designed for a reason. But there's other games, which I played for a long, long time, which obviously you can see all kinds of clones on my shelf, where it's, it's okay. You can tweak them, and all of a sudden, oh, gee, that's kind of fun again. Let's see. When there are possibilities, when a game has more possibilities to explore. And that could be simply that there's new settings for your favorite system. Not all systems can do everything, but, I look at all the stuff that they put out for Ubiquity, ever since Hollow Earth Expedition was released, and I could play in that system for a long time because I really, really dig that system. There's other systems out there where you can see that, gosh, they put out something else, I could play it that way. And of course you have to be careful because not all systems can do everything. We've talked about that before. But sometimes I can give like a system staying power for you. But also the other thing is just if a game itself contains an awful lot of possibilities, then it's really hard to exhaust them all. You know, I've talked about Broken Realms. It's on my shelf there somewhere. It's one of the big black books over there, and it sits there looking at me sadly, like, please play me. And that's one of these games that there's 12 parallel worlds, you know, parallel to our own. So there's 13 realities, and there's various meridians and powers that the characters could develop over time. There's just tons of possibilities in that game, and I've even, you know, had the opportunity to have an interchange with the designer of the game, and he told me, okay, well, here's the actual meta plot that I didn't publish, which I know some people are going to want me to tell you, but I'm not going to tell you. And it's so freaky and bizarre. I can't imagine running out of possibilities playing that game for a long, long time. And there's lots of other games like that, but the idea that that'll give a game a lot of staying power because, like, you know, I haven't really explored everything that this game can do with this system, with this premise, or this idea. That'll give a game staying power. But none of those are the real answer. They all absolutely contribute to giving a game staying power and making you want to return to it again and again. But, you know, I found out that, you know, a friend of mine in Korea, imagine that, had my answer, had the same answer that I kept coming back to. This is the real answer. And the real answer is the people involved. You know, when you play with the right people, it's not just a social thing, although that's a big part of it. Like, I'm going to play tonight with a group of people that I've come to really enjoy playing with. We've messed around with different games and everything like that. We click. And that's great. But there's also the other part of that. It's not just that, but it's the idea that, like, you know, even though, like, the settings and the genres and everything like that are really important, like when the characters themselves start to become real, when it's not just, you know, the 5 of us sitting at the table, but there's 10 of us because there's the characters involved as well. And those people just become just as real when they actually have real stakes, when we start to care about the stakes, when the fiction around those characters, all those scenarios and situations, which by themselves are neat and you need those, but when that fiction becomes real, when we become really immersed in that, you know, brings me back to a game again and again, because we really start to care and get into that whole fiction that we've created. And it's something that's really hard to explain to somebody else that's not involved in role-playing games, and sometimes it's really hard to explain to somebody that's not playing in that game with you, but there's that magic that happens. And that's one of those reasons that, like, you know, for, like, you know, our game of All for One Regime Diabolique, even though we hardly ever get to play it, that's one of those things that, like, when we go and play it, like, it feels like home, because that's it just feels right because of the people involved, because of the characters that the fictional people involved that now seem real to us. The whole thing, that will keep me coming back to a game again and again, independent of system, independent of all those other things I talked about. Just that fiction, you know, the people, the whole 9 yards. You know, starting to sound really esoteric and hippie-ish, but that's what gives, at least to me, a role-playing game staying power. So what about you? What's your answer?